Welcome to another CEO Wisdom podcast with David Binning. He is CEO at Brand Comms Bureau. He is currently in Sydney, Australia. I am in Oaxaca, Mexico. It's still my Sunday and it is David's Monday. Today, we're going to talk about a bunch of interesting topics: events, media strategy, public relations, content marketing, corporate writing, everything in between. This podcast is brought to you by podbuyer.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to a podcast just like this one, you can go to my podcasting agency's website, podbuyer.com. Dave, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Brand Comms Bureau?
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Thanks for having me. Look, I'm a former journalist, particularly specialized in the technology industry. Showing my age, I started out as a technology correspondent back in the mid '90s, and have had many roles with different newspapers and websites, and worked with wires and so forth. About 10 years ago, I went out and created a public relations company called Awesome Tech Media. And about 2.5 years ago, we rebranded as Brand Comms Bureau. Branding obviously is a much stronger kind of concept that people are kind of paying more attention to these days. Comms being communications, and we chose the word bureau to sort of partly to try and differentiate ourselves in what is a fairly crowded market in terms of the public relations industry. You know, we really do stress to clients that myself and other senior members of the team and directors, we've got a lot of, real world experience as journalists working in the media professions. So that was sort of partly the reason for the choice of the word bureau, BCB for short. We're effectively a full stack public relations, content, digital marketing and events agency. Events is something that we've sort of moved into more recently over the last sort of 9 to 12 months. And really what we try to help clients with is storytelling. First and foremost, trying to help clients understand what it is that's interesting about them. Quite often companies, other founders, directors, companies think that they know what's sort of newsworthy and most interesting about themselves, but it helps to engage with an agency like ours to help really sort of delve into the stories, not just the stories of the companies themselves or their products and solutions, but also the stories behind the founders and the key directors. That's all really key. Grist for the mill, as we say in Australia and UK in particular, that expression, which kind of means just information that helps you with your content creation and storytelling. But yeah, that's kind of us in a nutshell. The last sort of 18 months in particular, we've been on a pretty steep growth trajectory. We're bringing on some pretty exciting new clients. We've got large scale enterprise clients at the one end and kind of low budget, if I'm honest, startup clients at the other end. I think a lot of people that work in this sort of industry understand that it's important to have a right balance of clients, and sometimes you have clients that are really struggling they can struggle to sort of afford the full range of services, but you try to invest what you can in terms of your time and resources, and hope that if you ever have a unicorn on your hands, that that effort will pay off in the future.
Right. Okay. So your current agencies, tell me a bit more about the PR services or the branding services you offer on your side. What can I hire you for in terms of returns for myself, and what do you charge for these services?
Yeah, well, look, charging is interesting in public relations. I mean, it's we've got some clients that have us on retainer, other clients that prefer project by project, and some clients that just pay a straight sort of hourly rate, to the agency. So it all just sort of depends on what the agency is comfortable with. It depends on also the sort of the volume of activity that you're likely to that's likely to be necessary for a particular client. Public relations, for anybody out there who wonders what it means, it's effectively the act of trying to help ingratiate your client with the media. The purpose of the act, the headline purpose of the activity is to try and get journalists in as prestigious and widely read publications as possible to write positive stories about your client. But it also encompasses other things like crisis management. So, quite often a journalist will get in touch and say, "Hey, we've come across this bit of information about your client or a project that your client's involved with, and the story might not be very positive at all, and you've got to try and manage that." And that's effectively what crisis management is. But also in very practical terms, engaging with the media requires a lot of content, quite carefully curated content. Typically, you'll have a client that's got an announcement, a new product, or maybe a new senior executive that they've appointed, and they want the media to be interested in that. So how do you do that? Well, you have to really speak, at length with your client. Really understand all of the dimensions of the story that the news that they are purporting or that they are attempting to distribute to the media. You need to package that in a way, in a professional way, acknowledging the fact that journalists are more time poor than perhaps they've ever been. Everything down to the wording in the subject line of the email, the introduction of the email, and then of course the press release itself, the headline of the press release itself, the image that accompanies that press release. All of that is very, very carefully managed. And then from there, you hope to get journalists that don't just cut and paste the press release. I mean, we do see that increasingly these days. It's not something that's a negative really for us as an agency, because the key deliverable when it comes to public relations is what we call clippings. And the term clippings comes from back in the day when it was literally like little pieces of cut out stories from the newspaper. They're clippings. But a URL from a news organization that's written a story about your client online is still a clipping. So a clipping's still a clipping, but ideally you want a journalist getting in touch saying, "Hey, got the press release, interested about the story. Can we speak to the CEO or the person that's effectively put forward as the spokesperson for the company as part of that media announcement or media campaign or whatever the case may be?" And then you hope to have a sort of deeper engagement between your client and the journalist. And we find that typically leads to a better result. And also in that instance, you're facilitating a relationship between your client and the journalist, and potentially other journalists, other colleagues of that journalist within that media organization, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Also, I think that journalists are being bombarded left and right by startups, but I do think this is changing. I do think that power is shifting away from big media to smaller and better news outlet. I do think that the organization of the future will be a couple of co-founders with 1,000 AIs, a bunch of systems, and that will filter out the best news. And even before we get to that, if we check with news outlet, quote unquote, like Morning Brew, which is one of my favorite newsletter, I think they were acquired 5 years ago for a couple of millions. I do think that it's just packing up niched out information, writing it in a way that appeals to your audience and listeners. And I think being sponsor there, yes, being sponsor. I mean, TechCrunch is still cool. I mean, but I think that news outlet like Forbes and Wall Street Journal, I mean, they're prestigious, but I don't think the ROI is that much there. So I think this is changing. I think people will think more of outreaching to these smaller news outlet, probably directly from the sole creator of that newsletter, and try to get featured out there. I'm also extremely bullish on podcasts, right? I think it's easier than ever before to start your own podcast and to get featured there. I think there's podcasts for every imaginable niche. I'm also bullish on the fact that these are run by one or two creators, and that they can reach millions and millions of views. So what do you think about these opinions?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, in my space, our clients are predominantly technology clients, and I said, the ultimate objective of public relations is to get coverage in the media, but the ultimate objective, of course, is to generate leads. Now, and so therefore, the media that you target is very, very important. And you put me in mind of a situation I had many years ago where we got a client into a major daily newspaper here in Australia, and the CEO, about a month or so later, the CEO was complaining about the fact that they hadn't generated any sales from this story, but it was in like a massive newspaper. Like there's only 2 national newspapers in Australia, so any Australian person can guess as to which one I'm talking about. But in that case, it would have been more. We would have been better off, and the client would have been better off had we had coverage in specific trade press publications that were read by people who made real budget decisions in these sorts of organizations that this client is targeting and selling to. So that's something that's very easy. To your broader point about this sort of proliferation of media outlets, I think it's absolutely true. The good publications flourish pretty quickly, and the bad ones disappear pretty, probably even faster. So absolutely. And look, and I know myself, I launched a podcast for a client recently. The barriers to entry are fairly low, but I don't think that that's really a problem. As I say, good quality content survives, poor quality content dies pretty quickly. So, from a public relations perspective, from my perspective as founder of Brand Comms Bureau, running what is effectively a PR agency, I think it's a positive for us. That there is a more sort of diverse ecosystem of digital media out there. It does also mean that there's a little bit more work, as I say, in identifying what publications you should be targeting, because there is so much more to choose from. Yeah,
I think, yes, very niched out article, because there's still a constant out there, and it is the fact that even if you have a great product, most people will not pick up on it if you stay silent. And journalists, as good as they are, as good as their systems to pick up what's the next big article is, they might miss out on something. So I guess your role as the PR agency is really pack this value up and make sure that the USP is there, that the value is concisely written in a couple of lines, that there's the the bangers, the wow effect, the headline. You do like all the work for the journalist, and you establish yourself as a trust node to that journalist, so that every time that David sends them an article or a source, they know that they might be able to use it for their own career advancement, sort of.
Yeah, and look, we also assume that with every client that that there's a better way to tell their story, or that there are more stories to be told, right? So it's not just about having a really compelling new product coming to market, or an acquisition or something like that. Like quite often when we sit down with clients, and this is sort of what I'm talking about with talking back to my experience, as my long experience as a journalist and other members of the team, we have a lot of, we've spent a lot of time sitting down with people, being set up by other public relations companies, in the past when we've been journalists, who set us in front of the client. And there are a lot of assumptions that companies will make about, what the journalist will find interesting. But quite often, You'll go away, and again, referring back to my experience as a journalist. Quite often, you go away having had a conversation for 30 or 60 minutes or longer, especially if it's over a lunch, and figured out a different angle that probably wouldn't have been thought of by the public relations agency, when they were sort of putting together a fairly sort of staid, here's the announcement, here's the quotes accompanying it kind of scenarios. So, it could be anything. I mean, and the personal stories of the directors of our clients can be very potent and powerful as well, and often, and I've experienced this on both sides, you can really see journalists' eyes will light up just learning something, about the personal life of a founder and a director. And in that case, that enables, that makes it easier for journalists to inject, what we call color, into their stories as well. So it's not just, company X announces product YZ. It's, it could be a lot more sort of dynamic than that. And, and also to your point that journalists have sort of bombarded with information. If you can give them something that's a little bit more interesting, if you can give them something that enables them to write with a little bit more color, to write a more humorous or engaging headline that's, not as, that's less dull, because there is a lot of fairly dull content out there,
What about if I get into trouble and I attract the cancel mob? How can I not get into these waters, and how can I get out of them?
I see. Now, are you in trouble with the cancel mob, or we?
Not yet, but 100%
Yeah.
I'm gonna be. Have I been? No, I'm not really. I think, first I'm in B2B on my side. So it's like business people, usually they're way more intelligent, right? They're not gonna try to cancel me. Well, most of the B2B class, most of the business owner, quote unquote. I have been near that, but I say pretty much everything that I can think of. I'm an open book, so I'm going open source. I know that this is gonna attract controversy. Is it part of my goal? No, I think it's probably 10% of my goal to make myself interesting. I think I'm generally interesting. I'm like a specimen, and so are like most folks that I interview on this podcast. But yeah, just a little spice to my posts, so that I can potentially add value, because if I'm not, I'm just, bland, and people will not learn anything from my content. At least that's my thesis. Then I just want all my process to be out there, all of my thoughts and my mindset on my Twitter, most likely, so that folks in the future, when I'll be very successful, I think I will be that, given a couple of years or decades, and people can have a full blueprint on what happened through my mind. They can see the imperfection, they can see the fucked upness, they can see that I'm not politically correct. And I do appreciate that. I wish I would have had something like that on my end. Plus, an AI can scan that and probably make conclusions on myself that folks can digest, So with that being said, I do think that there's a lot of benefits for entrepreneurs that is to that approach. But I do think, yes, that some people sooner or later are going to cancel me.
Right. Okay. So look, your question about, I mean, it's effectively a question about crisis management, right? And, talking about this hypothetical that Charles Cormier is going to be cancelled. What it puts me in mind of is the importance of authenticity in terms of helping your client engaging with the media. Quite often the client will say, can we get away with saying this? And I'll be like, well, is it true? And, we'll have that conversation about, well, what would the sort of blowback be if we're sort of, if a journalist discovered that you're effectively lying to them, or lying by omission is probably a more sort of common kind of occurrence in public relations. The key thing is to be authentic, because journalists have incredibly finely honed radars for bullshit. Well, certainly the Australian ones do, and I know that the British ones do as well, because I've worked as a journalist in Britain as well. So, if you are in a situation where you've kind of got that risk of of journalists writing unfavorable content about you. I mean, you really need to sit down and be very honest about what the truth of the situation is, what aspects of whatever scenario is kind of problematic are true. Where are you at fault? Where are you not at fault? And then if you're able to, say for instance, you've got a journalist at a high profile publication that's constantly ringing your phone for comment, and you don't want to comment at all because you know that anything you say, is going to be part of something that could be hurting your career or getting you cancelled or whatever. If you're able to, have a direct meeting face to face or on the phone, with said journalist and able to come across as honest and authentic. That's the best way. That's the best, really, only way that you can manage those kind of situations. You certainly don't do yourself any favors by sort of bending the truth and, as I say, sort of lying by omission, because journalists are very, 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 very well attuned to that. Yeah.
I'm obviously past this stage of lying, like honesty is one of my first value, but I do think that people that tell the truth get canceled pretty much all the time. I mean, the truth is really hard to get to, right? You need to have scientific proof, and most of the time we don't. And even if I say something that might be true in 20 years, well, 20 years will pass until it has been proven to be true. So I think I'm past that stage, but your point is really good. And if I picture myself ever being in that situation, the question to ask myself, well, first, I don't, it's hard because in the moment of an interview, I might say stupid things, I might even get angry at the reporter. So I need to stay cool. Like that's step one, right? And possibly
definitely don't get angry.
Yeah, but what if like that reporter is doing a really bad job and they're malicious? A lot of reporters are like that. They had, whether it is because they're like that, they're just assholes, or whether they had a very bad day and they already made an opinion about me because they're humans, right? And they're like attacking. A PR masterclass on that, by the way, for folks listening, would be Adam Newman with Aaron Sorkin, I believe his name is, the Bloomberg guy. He was like firing very tough questions at him, one after the other in like 20 minutes. And Adam always kept his cool. It was like such a PR masterclass. Anyway, I think Adam is like a masterful communicator. I think he has his shit together as well with mindfulness and all of that. But what I was about to say is the framework is, what will I say and not regret in 20 to 25 years from now? Like, have I stayed true to my values in saying this? I think a lot of folks also, they pick wars that they shouldn't pick. It is like picking a war with a journalist or trying to be right, even if you're wronging a bunch of people in the process. Is that the right thing to do? Probably not. So it's a complex question. As you can see, I'm thinking out loud here, but I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah, well, look, the other thing I'd say is, well, just firstly, media training is very important. So, most PR agencies, including my own, conduct that, and typically we get clients in and we do sort of mock interviews, basically in this kind of this sort of format, right? Where you throw questions at your client and just get them kind of used to that sort of feeling of squirming in their chairs and not getting angry and managing their emotional
Maybe Adam
regulation.
got that before his interview. That's a good one.
Yeah, I think so. So yes, media training is important. But the other thing I'd say, Charles, is that the journalists are actually nicer, more scrupulous people than is probably sort of generally sort of understood in the community. They're fundamentally driven by the desire to create quality content to inform their audience. That's how they advance their careers. I mean, and you do see, of course, instances where people journalists tell out and out lies and behave in an unscrupulous manner. But the sort of the community of journalists is still, and I think will always be fairly tightly bound by that. that code, which is finding out information first, and informing their audiences and making their audiences better informed and more educated, I suppose. I mean, that might sound a little bit arrogant, but that really is what drives journalists, and that's how they advance their careers. That's how their peers view them. So the journalists that do well, the journalists that win the awards in the main, are those that are sort of viewed by their peers as having accomplished those goals more effectively than the others. So there's no reason to fear them, unless you start lying. Unless you start lying to them, then you can fear them.
I think you're definitely right on that, and maybe it's like just one bad apple that rots the reputation of the other. I think it's a cool job. I'm a journalist technically right now, like it's most of my life. So it's how can I create nice conversation, make my guests feel at ease, ask the right questions, generate neurons in brain. That's how I see this, and go for the truth and keep people accountable as well. That's one clear purpose. I think this society can use so much more accountability. It's still very easy to speak, but it's what's your words vs actions ratio. Let's hope that it's 80% action, 20% word, and it cannot be less than that. Yes, journalists are good in intention, but I will also add this caveat there with news outlets like TikTok, and the attention span is shorter. I think IQ is generally decreasing as well.
I think IQ is decreasing. Well, that's a controversial statement.
Yeah, and yes, it is. I would say that this is false as well, but more on that later. In some sense it could be. It's not IQ generally, but a sphere of intelligence is probably diminishing. My point is this brings founders to start companies like BuzzFeed, like Business Insiders, which are, to my opinion, really low quality journalistic work. It's like, how can we fetch the most clickbaity headline? It's toxic, I think. Like me, I ignore everything that's from these news outlet because I think I'm losing neurons in the process. It's really low quality information. It's mostly on the serotonin side. So we just made the comparison of actions vs words. Well, if there would be like a little line here, it would be serotonin vs education, right? So I think they're way more on the side of serotonin and entertainment. And me, I'm looking for education because serotonin doesn't scale, right? If I would be a serotonin fiend, I'd watch porn all day, I'd eat fast food all day, I would get drunk every day. By the way, I've done all of the above. I think that education is way more scalable. I think if I get good info in my brain, act upon them, my life is getting better and better and better, more happier. So with all of that being said, there is this kind of journalist that's always seeking, the next news, the next controversy. How can I expose that person? If you go on YouTube, that's also a toxic trend. That's not only for journalists, but also creators, right? They expose this person, they diss that person, they make that person angry. So how can we, or the first question is, should it be that way? Should we give them what they want? Should that change? And if so, if not, how can we change that from a journalist perspective?
Oh, well, we can't really. I mean, I think we're just in it's a bit of a Wild West scenario at the moment. I think, we're just sort of, we're just watching the pendulum swing back and forth, and it's going to take a little bit more time before it sort of settles, I think. But look, we're moving in the right direction, but there's always going to be madness on the internet, and that's partly why we love it, right?
But I think it creates division in the US, and it's probably the last thing that they need. I mean, it's not gonna end in a war, but it's quite toxic, and people get their sources of information from, this Facebook conspiracy theory, and I think it leads the society. I think it makes the society vulnerable, just like big media is is draining a lot of energy from society and is not giving back a lot. I think big food is also that way. They put all of these additives in the food, and I think at that level of scale, they're giants that are sucking value out of society and not helping it. So is it already solving itself with like these new creators that I described? Or by I agree with you. I don't think we can change it. I think humans that are that way will still stay that way, and there's a market for that. And entrepreneurs will just give them what they want. And I just guess, yeah, the society will kind of separate itself in various communities. Um, should we end the podcast on such a sad note?
It doesn't feel sad at all. But I mean, just to inject a positive note, I think I think you can trust the average person to figure out what's genuine and what's nonsense. On the internet. And look, I'm sure when newspapers first became sort of scalable and a sort of a mass industry, however long ago would say that might have been, I suppose it would be getting close to. I suppose we're talking about 200 years ago. I suppose. There may well have been similar concerns. Back then.
Way worse.
Quite,
I mean,
quite possibly.
From believing in all kinds of gods, the cults, and misinformation must have. I mean, is it even fair to call it misinformation at that point? Like probably 95% of what they believed 300 years ago is false.
Maybe. Hard to say. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, it's a cool conversation for sure, and I'm pretty sure people will grow brain cells out of it. It's also complex topics, and our limited human brains cannot fix everything today. Just like I think in 100 years we'll have super intelligent AGIs that will probably disclaim a good amount of what I just said, but I think it's a start. And yeah, thank you for coming in today, Dave. It's been wildly entertaining. Can you tell us where to find out more about you and about your company?
Yeah, right. So the URL is bcbureau.com.au. You can find all the information about our services, bios on myself and the other directors, client testimonials. It's pretty much there. And I'm heading to Singapore in about 5 weeks' time. Sort of the early stages of investigating establishing an office in Asia. So watch this space. And yeah, Charles, really, really appreciate you bringing me on. It's been great talking to you.
My pleasure. And Charles Cormier here, founder wisdompodcast.com. You can find us there. And if you want to start scale, be invited to a podcast, go to podpire.com. That was David Binning.